I worked at the Granite school district before my mission, around 3 years. And then after my mission, they took me back on and I served an apprenticeship in carpentry. So I worked as a carpenter for a little while with the district, and then a friend of mine, where we were living in Hunter, invited me to consider applying for a position at Hercules Incorporated, which was then Hercules Powder Company, who had just received the contract from the U.S. Air Force to build the third stage of the Minuteman missile. And they needed people who were acquainted with graphics. And so they asked, or I applied for the job and got a job as a draftsman at Hercules. I worked there for 2 or 3 years, and there was a company in California that had just received the contract on the Titan 3C missile. That's one where they have the booster straps on the sides of the missile. And we were contracted, the company was, to build those strap-on boosters. They were 10 feet in diameter and 160 feet long. It was just an incredible task. And they needed designers. So having had a little experience with Hercules and become acquainted primarily with one phase of the graphics definitions and production and inspection, called geometric dimensioning and tolerancing. That was my specialty at Hercules, and they needed people at the company in California. It's called UTC, United Technology Corporation. Later changed its name to United Technology Center. So I interviewed for a position there, was given an opportunity to go, and so that accounted for our move to California. I worked at that company for a couple of years, and then IBM invited me to an interview. And following the interview at IBM, they offered me a position as a designer there. So that was my work history at that point. The problem that we encountered was that at IBM, they had a policy that was very strict. They said people could not hold positions of responsibility where they were in management, that status, without a degree, and I didn't have a degree. My manager called me in one day and he said, "You really need to consider going to school." Said that they had meetings over that last year, 12 months, where in each meeting the decision was made that I was probably best prepared to take one of the positions in the company that they needed filled. But in each case, they had to deny it because I didn't have a degree. So he encouraged it, and we decided that we would fast and pray about going to school. We did. And the Lord was gracious to us. I had an opportunity when we were here for conference. I was bishop, and I stopped in and talked to Elder Richards in the church office building. Talked to him about going to school. And his explanations were sufficient, at least, to help me make that decision. He couldn't advise me to go to school anymore than he could advise me not to. But he told me something that I found very difficult to understand at the time. He said, "If you'll go to school, you'll be a better bishop." And that frankly went against virtually everything I'd ever thought. And I came away not knowing what that meant for sure, but we were encouraged. We had additionally, like I say, we fasted and we prayed. And one Sunday morning on a fast Sunday, we came away from our prayer determined that that was the right decision to do. So we came to school, and at BYU, I was able to finish a 4-year degree in 3 years to the day, and which was good for us because Myrna had to work during that period of time. But we just, when I finished school with that degree, the university asked me if I would be willing to stay. and work there in their public relations arena, which I did for a year. But during the year, the technology department got a hold of me and asked me if I'd be willing to teach a class at night, and which I was happy to do. And that turned out so well that it literally changed our course. It was what I wanted to do. I wanted to teach. And so at the end of the year, they offered me a contract to teach. And we spent the next 30 years there teaching in engineering. Loved it. Loved my students. But where do we go from there?
Okay, you need to tell them that they awarded you the professorship, which was something they don't usually do, even though he hadn't gone to school to get his doctorate. They awarded him the professorship.
Yeah, well, the ranks at the university go from instructor, which is what I hired at first, and then they measure three things specifically. They look at your student evaluations. They look at your service at the university. Have you limited yourself just to teaching, or have you expanded out? Do you serve on college or university committees and other kinds of things? They look at what they call the citizenship. So you're teaching and evaluated both by students and teachers, faculty members, and then your citizenship. And then they look finally at what might become your research program. They don't expect a research program from an instructor, but there was potential. So I was awarded the assistant professorship on the basis of those three things. Then later on, I was advanced to assistant professor, or associate professor, I'm sorry. And finally, probably would have been close to 80, maybe 84. I was in a position, done a lot of research in the areas of my expertise, and I wanted to apply for full professorship, but I only had a master's degree, and that was extremely unusual that they would even consider that because of the nature of the business we were in. But I prepared, in fact, the dean of the college, I had a conversation with him and he encouraged me not to apply. He thought it would just be a disappointment to me. I didn't think it'd ever get past the department, much less the college. And if I went to the college from there to the university, knew I wouldn't get it. So he was trying to prepare me for that disappointment and suggested I not do it. Then I got to thinking, well, at that point I was the associate dean in the college. And I thought if I've ever got a chance, it'll be now. If I wait until I'm back as a faculty member, the chances will have gone away. So I decided to do it anyway. And I had been serving as the department chairman and also as the associate dean, had me in both positions for a while because they hadn't been able to find a replacement for me in the department. And it was interesting because none of the department faculty members, they were just, nobody could decide on who they thought would do that job, you know, the way it needed to be done. So I was serving in both capacities, and which didn't hurt my service record. But I made the application, filled out all of the requisite forms, and provided a 4-inch book of my history at the university and my research successes and speaking engagements and publications and whatnot. But then I submitted it, make a long story short, and it passed the department without a single declining vote. And it went on to the college, and they kept it there for a long time. Finally, the dean came to me and he said, I want you to identify 7 schools across the country who are the top schools in your field of expertise, in CAD/CAM, all the automations associated with modeling in the engineering environment. Wanted the names of those schools, so I gave him the names of the schools I thought were absolutely tops. And they wrote to all 7 schools, and they sent a copy of that 4-inch book, if you can believe it, every one of them. And when the returns came, it was a shock to the dean, because they said, in the first place, they wouldn't have hired me because I didn't have the PhD. But they said, that's your fault, not his. And then they looked at all the stuff and they said, anybody that's done this level of work, has this level of notoriety, of good, solid work in these areas, he said he deserves it. Every school said the same thing. So I was awarded the full professorship. First and only one in the college to ever get there without a PhD. So, do I lament that? No. At one point, in fact, I went to the dean, a different dean, and told him I'd like to go ahead and get my PhD. But my family was of such size and complexity at that point that I'd need to do it there, if they would let me in. And he said he would not recommend it simply because of my age. You know, by the time I finished the PhD, I wouldn't have very much time to really develop beyond that. And he didn't feel like I needed it. So we stayed. Is that enough?
Sounds good to me.
Okay.